If you have ever stood in the freezer aisle staring at a wall of smiling cows, vanilla swirls, farm fonts, and words like homemade, natural, extra creamy, slow churned, or classic, there is a good chance you were not really choosing between ice creams. You were choosing between identities. One carton is trying to look old-fashioned. Another is trying to look healthy. Another is trying to look indulgent without saying why. And the biggest trick in the aisle is that a lot of people think they're comparing dairy richness when they're actually comparing branding, air, sweeteners, stabilizers, and how far a company can stretch the idea of ice cream before most shoppers notice. That is why this matters. Not because every cheap tub is evil, not because every premium pint is noble, but because the freezer aisle is full of products that borrow the trust of real ice cream while delivering something thinner, busier, cheaper, or more engineered than the label mood suggests. So here's the divide. I'm going to walk through 17 brands I would not buy if what I want is honest, cream-forward, genuinely satisfying ice cream. And I'm going to put them against 8 brands that still feel like they remember what the product is supposed to be. And I need to make one thing clear right up front. I'm not saying every item from every company is identical, and I'm not saying these products are unsafe. I'm saying a lot of shoppers use the phrase real ice cream to mean something very specific. Dairy first, not illusion first. Cream before tricks, a base you can respect before the toppings start shouting. Legally, ice cream has standards, but in the store, shoppers are looking for something even simpler. Does this taste like it was built from milk, cream, sugar, eggs, and flavor? Or does it taste like the company solved a cost problem and then wrapped it in nostalgia? Let's start with one of the most famous trust gaps in the aisle, Breyers. For a lot of people, Breyers still lives in memory as the clean, old reliable carton your parents bought without thinking. That memory is doing a lot of work. Because once you start reading beyond the front, you realize this brand has become one of the clearest examples of why shoppers can't buy a legacy name on autopilot anymore. Some Breyers products are still labeled ice cream. Others move into frozen dairy dessert territory. That alone should make you slow down. If a brand trains you to associate it with simple vanilla, but the category shifts depending on the tub, the burden quietly moves from the company to you. Now you have to audit every carton. That's not confidence. That's homework in disguise. And the texture often tells the same story. Instead of dense dairy payoff, you get something softer, fluffier, more eager to melt into sweet foam than linger like cream. Now put that next to Häagen-Dazs. This is where the contrast becomes obvious fast. The brand isn't pretending to be low-calorie, family-size value, or farm-themed comfort food. It's selling richness, and when you check the base, it usually behaves like richness. Cream, milk, eggs, sugar, vanilla. Scoop it and you feel resistance. Let it sit for a minute and it relaxes instead of collapsing. Eat it and the flavor lands in layers instead of flashing sweet and disappearing. It costs more. Of course it does. But at least the product explains the price with density and simplicity. That's the rule you want to remember right here. If a company charges you for indulgence, the ingredient logic and texture should cash that check. Next up, Blue Bunny. This is one of the easiest brands to overtrust because it leans so hard into familiarity. Friendly colors, giant tubs, family comfort, fun branding. But here's the issue. Blue Bunny has been one of those names where the wording shift matters. On some of the big tubs, what many shoppers assume is plain old ice cream is actually labeled frozen dairy dessert. That's not a tiny technicality. That is the legal language telling you the product no longer fits the standard people assume when they hear the word ice cream. And when companies make that move quietly, the shelf experience barely changes. Same blue, same bunny, same emotional promise. Different product logic. The kind of compromise that shows up in the bowl too. The scoop looks plush, but the richness isn't carrying the whole performance. It's smoother in a way that can feel manufactured, almost like the product is optimized to be easy, not memorable. Now compare that with Tillamook. Tillamook is not bare-bones minimalist like Häagen-Dazs, and it doesn't need to be. What it does well is give you a product that still tastes dairy-led. The base feels broad and creamy. The vanilla actually coats instead of vanishing. And even when you do see stabilizers in the mix, the overall build still reads like real ice cream rather than a dessert system trying to impersonate it. You're paying for a large format premium style product, and you generally get a texture that feels intentionally creamy rather than inflated. That's another shopping rule. Not every extra ingredient is automatically a deal breaker. The real question is whether the final product still behaves like cream is in charge. Then we hit Edie's and Dryers, which are essentially the same conversation wearing two regional name tags. This is where the aisle really starts playing identity games. Shoppers see vanilla, classic, familiar tub, household name, and assume standard ice cream logic. But on some of these products, the label language drops the pretense for you. Frozen dairy dessert. That's the tell. And once you know that, the whole experience makes more sense. A softer body. A sweetness that steps forward before the dairy does. A feeling that the product was engineered to hit a broad, inoffensive middle, not to deliver actual depth. These are exactly the brands that survive on shelf recognition. They don't need to impress every scoop if enough buyers are grabbing them out of habit. Then you jump to Jenny's, and whether or not every flavor is your thing, the difference in intention is obvious. Jenny's doesn't taste like a brand trying to hide a weak base behind a logo. It tastes like a brand that assumes flavor architecture matters. The dairy presence is there. The texture has movement, but not flimsiness. The flavors are built instead of sprayed on. Even something as simple as a vanilla-based product feels like someone thought through what the milk, cream, sweetness, and finish are supposed to do together. And that is why a better brand gives relief instead of just luxury. It removes confusion. You're not decoding whether the carton is giving you a dessert loophole. You're evaluating flavor preference, which is where shopping should have started in the first place. Now pause here, because this is where the category stops making sense for a lot of people. They think the freezer aisle is divided into cheap, premium, and healthy. It's not. A more honest map would be this: genuinely dairy-driven, compromise-heavy but familiar, and hyper-formulated with a health halo. That brings us to Halo Top and Nix. These brands are not even really hiding what they are if you read them honestly. They are selling a nutritional permission structure: lower calorie, lighter, better for you, more fiber, alternative sweetener logic. And if that is your goal, fine. But if your title claim is about actual real ice cream, these are not where I'm sending you. Because once you start stacking ultra-filtered milk, soluble fibers, sugar substitutes, glycerine, allulose, erythritol, added protein systems, or low-fat engineering into the formula, you are no longer in the classic ice cream conversation. You are in the food technology conversation. The texture usually tells on itself. It can freeze harder, soften oddly, or melt into something that feels more designed than churned. Again, that doesn't make it forbidden. It just means it is not the answer if what you want is the real thing. So what's the better contrast here? Van Leeuwen. This is one of those brands where even people who think they don't care about ingredient logic notice the difference when the spoon hits the pint. The body is dense without turning waxy. The flavor feels calm instead of desperate. Vanilla tastes like a real base flavor, not a sweet white platform waiting for mix-ins to rescue it. The ingredients, in the classic line, reflect that more traditional approach: milk, cream, sugar, egg yolks, vanilla, salt. Simple doesn't automatically mean better, but when the product also eats like real ice cream, simplicity stops being a marketing phrase and starts being evidence. Now let's talk about the value trap section of the aisle, because this is where shoppers get convinced they are being practical when they are often buying the most watered-down version of the category. Great Value, Favorite Day, and Kroger's own freezer lines all live in this zone. Different stores, same emotional math: big tub, good price, vanilla promise, maybe a farmhouse script, maybe a premium-sounding subline. But what do you usually get? An inconsistent mix of actual ice cream and frozen dairy dessert products, depending on the exact carton. That is the core issue. You're not just buying lower cost, you're buying lower clarity. One version may technically be ice cream. Another version right next to it may shift into frozen dairy dessert language. The brand umbrella stays the same, the shopper confidence stays the same, but the standards move around under your feet. And the eating experience often follows suit. More sweetness up front, less lingering butterfat richness, a faster melt. Sometimes that glossy, almost over-smooth surface that looks creamy in the scoop but lands thin on the palate. This is where Strauss Family Creamery earns its place. Strauss does not win by pretending to be cheap. It wins by being legible. When a vanilla product is built on organic cream, milk, sugar, egg yolks, vanilla, and real bean specks, you do not need a paragraph of mood setting on the carton. The spoon does the talking. The taste is clean but not empty. The richness is there without becoming greasy. And maybe most important, the product feels like it respects the category. That is an underrated quality. Respect. Because a lot of freezer brands don't respect ice cream. They respect margin. Strauss makes you remember what happens when a company treats the base as the star instead of the cheapest possible vehicle. Now slide over to Turkey Hill, Friendly's, and Hood and watch how nostalgia becomes a shield. These brands know exactly what memory they're tapping into. Summer, family freezers, birthday parties. East Coast familiarity, school night dessert. But nostalgia doesn't make the carton more honest. Turkey Hill is especially revealing because different lines within the brand can point in different directions. The regular line may feel ordinary and compromise heavy, while a more natural or premium line may behave better. That split is the problem. The brand is teaching you to trust the name instead of the specific formula. Friendly's does a similar thing in novelty products and dessert-style offerings, where frozen dairy dessert language shows up right in the product identity. Hood has dessert line products that also cross into frozen dairy dessert territory. And the shopper who isn't reading carefully still thinks they bought the old familiar thing. That is the hidden loss. Not just richness, transparency. Then you taste Grater's, and the conversation changes. Grater's feels like what people imagine old-school premium ice cream is supposed to feel like before the aisle got optimized into mush. Dense, dairy-rich, not trying to seem virtuous, not trying to seem cheap, not trying to seem light but still indulgent. Just unapologetically built for flavor and body. Even when there are stabilizers in the broader product line, the overall experience is still unmistakably ice cream first. The spoon drags with weight. The melt is slower and creamier. The flavor finishes deeper. This is the kind of brand that teaches an important rule without saying a word. If the first bite tastes expensive in the right way, the formulation probably started from quality instead of compensation. Here's another aisle myth that needs to go. Familiar regional loyalty does not guarantee a superior tub. Kemp's and Bluebell are perfect examples of why that matters. Both brands have fiercely loyal followings. Both trigger emotional defenses the second anyone criticizes them. And both, on some major vanilla-style products, can show you the exact kind of ingredient creep that turns a beloved brand into a compromise people protect out of memory. Syrups climbing into the formula. High fructose corn syrup showing up where you want simpler sweetness. Gums stacking into the texture system. A base that tastes broad and pleasant enough, but not nearly as clean or sturdy as the brand loyalty implies. Bluebell, especially, lives on identity. People talk about it like it's a regional treasure before they even talk about how it tastes. That should make you careful, because anytime the cultural aura is doing more work than the ingredient discipline, you are paying for belonging as much as dessert. Now put those up against McConnell's. McConnell's is one of those brands that doesn't need to scream authenticity because the formulation and texture already imply it. Cream, milk, cane sugar, egg yolks, vanilla, a tighter ingredient philosophy, and a final product that feels structured rather than padded. The sweetness doesn't bulldoze the dairy. The flavor has an adult calm to it. Even the mouthfeel tells you the company is aiming for depth, not just scoopability. This is what better ice cream does. It makes the cheap stuff feel loud and the over-engineered stuff feel busy. Let me give you a quick self-check moment. If a tub has you more excited about the words on the front than the base in the bowl, you're probably buying branding. If the vanilla only tastes alive when you drown it in chocolate syrup, cookie pieces, or cereal toppings, you're probably compensating for a weak foundation. Real ice cream should survive a plain spoon. That's the test almost nobody talks about. And that brings us to 3 more brands people buy because they assume generic dessert is generic dessert, so why bother caring? Signature Select, Sundae Shop, and Blue Ribbon Classics. This cluster matters because it represents the silent middle of the aisle, not famous enough to trigger loyalty wars, not premium enough to trigger aspiration. Just there, affordable, familiar enough, good enough for the kids, good enough for a barbecue, good enough because nobody is expecting much. That is exactly why these brands get away with frozen dairy dessert products, dessert-style novelties, and weak base formulas without much scrutiny. Shoppers are not auditing them because the price tells them not to expect elegance. But here's the problem with that logic. Cheap does not have to mean murky. Low price does not require label ambiguity. Yet over and over, these are the kinds of brands where the easiest versions of vanilla or novelty desserts lean on the broadest definitions possible. They're designed to disappear into cones, sandwiches, toppings, birthdays, and chaotic family servings where nobody pauses long enough to notice the difference between creamy and just cold. And then Alex walks in as the strongest contrast on the list because it's not just trying to make premium ice cream, it's trying to make ingredient trust part of the product identity in a way shoppers can actually feel. Rich cream, a more deliberate sourcing story. No seed oil gimmickry in the classic positioning. No overcomplicated fake health performance. Just a product that wants to prove that better inputs can create better ice cream without turning the carton into a lecture. Scoop it, and it behaves like something built from dairy confidence. Eat it, and the sweetness doesn't rush past the cream. The flavor stays articulate. That is what the end of the ladder is supposed to show you. Better ice cream is not just more expensive ice cream. It is clearer ice cream. So let's pull the whole list together. The 17 brands I would not buy blindly if my goal is actual, cream-forward, trustworthy ice cream are Breyers, Blue Bunny, Eddie's, Dreyer's, Halo Top, Nick's, Great Value, Favorite Day, Kroger's Freezer Line, Turkey Hill's more standard tubs, Friendly's dessert-style products, Hood's frozen dessert-style offerings, Kemp's, Bluebell's more compromise-heavy vanilla staples, Signature Select, Sundae Shop, and Blue Ribbon Classics. Some of those brands sell items that are legally ice cream. Some sell products that openly use frozen dairy dessert language. Some live in the light ice cream world. Some simply lean too hard on syrupy, padded, or brand memory formulas for me to call them the real thing without hesitation. The common thread is not that they are all identical. The common thread is that they ask the shopper to do too much trust work, and the 8 brands that actually feel like real ice cream, the kind you can buy because the base itself earns the bite, are Häagen-Dazs, Tillamook, Jenny's, Van Leeuwen, Strauss Family Creamery, Graeter's, McConnell's, and Alex. Not because every flavor is perfect, not because every brand is cheap, not because all of them use the exact same formula, but because they generally preserve the central truth the aisle keeps trying to blur. Real ice cream should taste like dairy first, not positioning first. Now here's the practical framework you can use the next time you're standing in front of that freezer door with cold air hitting your face and 20 options claiming to be the smart choice. First, read the legal product name, not the fantasy name. If it says frozen dairy dessert, light ice cream, or some frozen treat wording instead of straightforward ice cream, understand that you are already outside the classic conversation. Second, look at the first few ingredients. You want milk, cream, sugar, maybe egg yolks, maybe a few stabilizers depending on the style. But if the formula reads like a workaround before it reads like dessert, that matters. Third, test the vanilla. Vanilla is the honesty flavor. If a brand cannot make plain vanilla feel rich, clean, and satisfying, all the candy-loaded flavors in the world are just camouflage. Fourth, notice the melt. Real ice cream softens. A compromise-heavy product often collapses, foams out, or turns strangely slick or watery. Fifth, stop confusing memory with quality. The brand you grew up with may not be the product you think it still is. That is the bigger story hiding underneath this entire category. The freezer aisle is not just selling dessert, it is selling borrowed trust, borrowed from childhood, borrowed from dairy imagery, borrowed from words like natural, homemade, classic, slow-churned, and extra creamy, borrowed from tubs that want to look richer than they eat. And once you see that, the aisle becomes much easier to navigate. You stop asking which carton is loudest. You start asking which one would still make sense if the front label were covered up. Because in the end, that is the real dividing line. Not the prettiest packaging, not the strongest nostalgia, not the biggest tub, not the calorie halo. Just this. If the carton lost its branding and all you had was the ingredient panel, the legal name, the scoop, and the melt, would you still call it real ice cream with a straight face? If you disagree with any of these picks, tell me which brand you think deserves defending and exactly why. If there's a freezer aisle favorite in your house that you want put under the same kind of audit, drop it in the comments. And if you've got a tub in your freezer right now, go check the legal name on the front and the first 5 ingredients on the back, because that little label detail tells you a lot more than the carton ever planned to.